Zoo. Louisa began her animal and science career at UC Davis, where she studied animal biology, focusing on patterns of social behavior in TT monkeys. She received her master's degree. Hopefully, I said TT correctly. Okay. She received her master's degree in biology from Sonoma State University, examining the social networks of hamadryas, baboons, at Oakland Zoo in 2017. Louisa has 10 plus years of experience studying animal behavior and welfare in field sites, lab conditions, pre-release programs, and zoological facilities. Louisa has been at her current role as Applied Wildlife Welfare Manager for the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance and Safari Park since 2020. In her role, Louisa works with an innovative team that strives to enhance welfare by developing meaningful experiences for wildlife, using progressive approaches to care strategies, and building connections within and outside the organization.
Just one quick announcement. If you did take photos of Wiley, please don't publicly post them just for legality reasons for this school. All right, thank you.
That's okay. Okay, yeah, so my name is Louisa Radosevich. Like they said, my role is Applied Wildlife Welfare Manager. So I work for the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. Specifically, I work at the Safari Park. Is this my clicker? Yeah. Okay. That's my email. If you guys have questions, I'll show it at the end as well. Which way am I supposed to? There we go. Okay. So for those of you that may not be aware, so the San Diego Zoo has multiple facilities. So we have the traditional San Diego Zoo, which is in downtown San Diego in Balboa Park, with kind of, like I said, the traditional zoo habitats. That's where our giant pandas are right now. So that's kind of the hot topic right now. We also have the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, which is about 40 miles north. That was originally developed as a breeding facility, but it's much larger spaces with multi-species habitats. So two different facilities, but we're all under the same umbrella of the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. In addition, we also have conservation programs and partners around the world. So I'll be talking a little bit about welfare in those facilities as well. So just a little bit about our Applied Wildlife Welfare Program. So we operate under the foundation of the Opportunities to Thrive. So that was kind of built off of the 5 freedoms, but instead of focusing on negatives, which the 5 freedoms tends to, it's focusing much more on what positive opportunities should we be providing for animals in managed care. And so our program is really built to provide these opportunities, and we do that through multiple different programs. So the first is our animal welfare assessments. So we're required by AZA, or the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, to do welfare assessments every year. So we do annual welfare assessments with all of our species, all of our teams. We conduct welfare research. We also build outcome-based care. And that's what I'm mostly going to be talking about today, is our outcome-based care programs, and kind of getting away from the traditional concept of enrichment and more into care programs that themselves are enriching. We also teach welfare courses. So we teach welfare courses for our staff members 4 times throughout the year, as well as for internship programs, things like that. We do talks like these. And we also, a small part of our job is evaluating welfare concerns. So if we have a team member or a guest or a volunteer that is concerned about the welfare of an animal and they don't feel comfortable coming and talking to someone, they can submit it through an anonymous web page, and we will evaluate that concern. So are you guys all familiar with the concept of enrichment? Okay, so can anyone tell me, like, what does enrichment usually look like? What kinds of enrichment do you often see in like zoos or facilities that might have enrichment? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so well, we've got a ringer in here. So, but oftentimes it's a toy, right? We think of like a toy, like a boomer ball, maybe an ice cake. A lot of times for like birds, we have kind of chew toys, right? And while having those opportunities to interact and play is important, Our goal for the Applied Wildlife Welfare Program is to think about the animal's experience as the goal rather than focusing on specifically the item that we're providing. So the experience is the goal, outcome-based care is how we get there. So again, when I talk about outcome-based care, what I mean is that enrichment is often this added thing, right? Again, it's a toy, it's a boomer ball, it's something that's added to the habitat or the animal's life in the hope that that thing makes the animal's life better. Realistically, if we have to have this supplemental program of enrichment to enhance an animal's welfare, then that's an indication that our care program is failing because we need this extra thing. Whereas if we have a care program that has enriching opportunities built into it, then we don't necessarily need this outside program of enrichment. So that's the concept of outcome-based care, is thinking about how can we incorporate enrichment or enriching experiences into an animal's day-to-day life without it having to be this supplemental extra thing that we do, when we have time. So a couple different ways that we start to build this program. The first is through what we call welfare working groups. So we have multiple groups throughout both the zoo and the park, teams of care specialists that will meet and talk about animal behavior and what the behavioral goals are for their animals. So I'll be showing a ton of different examples from these groups. I think our favorite right now is some of the reptile groups, some of the less charismatic, less popular species. And what's really great about those programs is they're keeper driven. So our care specialists are the ones that are driving that program. It's not up to managers or the welfare staff to drive it. We're there to help facilitate, but the care specialists are the ones that are really pushing the programs forward. We also use something called an outcome-based workflow. So you don't need to get too into the details here, but the idea is that often when we think about enriched or enrichment, we're thinking about those inputs, right, the items. And then we try to maybe justify that with what behaviors we're looking for that item to elicit. Our program is behavior-based. So we're thinking about what are the behaviors we're looking to elicit first, and we dive really deeply into each of those behaviors and brainstorm all of that information before getting to the step of identifying the inputs. And we find that doing this step backwards like this really elicits some really complex ideas. So I'll just give you a brief example. So we're thinking about hunting as a behavior for like a large carnivore. Again, oftentimes we would say putting in meat in an enriching way or a boomer ball, right, to chase might elicit kind of a hunting behavior. But when we start to do this workflow, we dive really deeply into what does hunting look like? Are they hunting for a large prey, a small prey, a bird? Are they hunting in a forest, in a grassland? And thinking about how the behavior looks different for all of those different aspects, and how can we give them the entire experience of hunting and not just the act of eating meat, right? So that's what this workflow is meant to kind of bring out those ideas. And just to give you an example, one of my favorite behaviors to do a workflow for is drinking, because drinking is a behavior we don't often think about as complex, right? But if you can see from these images, there are lots of really complex ways in which animals acquire water. The other thing I like about drinking is that it's a resource that we often provide for free. We give animals water in like a Lixit or a Nelson drinker, whereas for food, we're always asking them to do challenges to overcome, use skills, overcome challenges to get access to that food. We don't do that for drinking. So a lot of times when we're thinking about the behaviors we want our animals to elicit, we're thinking about what are all the behaviors they would be exhibiting in the wild, what are all the complex ways in which they would be acquiring resources, and trying to think outside the box. So when we talk about outcome-based care, we kind of break it into two pieces. So the first is enhanced care, and the second is enriched events. So enhanced care is the idea of how do we provide an animal's day-to-day care in a way that's enriching, right? Feeding opportunities, acquiring water, even things like shipments or presentations or programs. How can we provide all of those normal, routine things in a way that's enriching. Enriched events is just taking that a little bit further and thinking about animals are experiencing or having a relationship with their environment that lasts through seasons, months, years. So what are the ways that they're engaging with their environment? And can we create multi-day or multi-season or even multi-year experiences where animals are using cues to understand their relationship and know what's going to be happening from one day to the next and what is expected of them from one day to the next? So if we're talking about outcome-based care, again, outcome-based care is kind of the goal. We use that workflow to brainstorm ideas, and then we use enhanced care and enriched events to get there. So I'm going to start by talking about some examples of enhanced care. So if we were trying to feed a serval, which for those of you that don't know, a serval is like a small carnivore, like a small cheetah. If we had these 4 items and we were trying to elicit fishing behavior for a serval, what would we do with these 4 items? Anyone want to answer that? It's not a trick question. Yeah, exactly. So you'd fill the tub. It's not a trick question. You'd fill the tub with water and you'd put the fish in the tub, right? And you'd elicit fishing, right? But if you wanted to elicit fishing like a serval would, they might be looking in rocky streams where they can't actually see the fish. They're reaching in without having the opportunity to see that fish first. So what might you add to this to elicit that behavior of fishing like a serval would in the wild? Yeah, you could do a short running stream. But if you wanted to do something just with this example, one thing that the teams did is they took an easily available resource, which is hay. We have it all over the zoo, right? And you can just put the hay right on top of that water, right? So now the serval can't see, that hay floats pretty easily, and they have to reach in without being able to see. And then this is the behavior that we saw. Right, so a simple addition to the animal's daily care that created a challenge for her. I think there are some rocks in there too. And she came back to this multiple times. So it took her a lot longer than it normally would to acquire the resource of fish. Another example is enhanced care. How many of you have been to the zoo? Okay. Do you guys know where the Galapagos tortoises are? You do, right? So how are the Galapagos tortoises usually fed? Do you remember? Yeah, so they had cabbage that was dropped on green lunch trays, which killed me, right? Because that's not how a Galapagos tortoise would be eating food, right? And so we have a reptile team that's been working on reptile welfare at the zoo, and they wanted to create a more natural experience. So rather than putting it on the green lunch trays, they took what are called browse bones. So browse bones are things that we often have at the zoo. Essentially, it's after a branch has been stripped of all the leaves by a browser, so like a giraffe, then we take those branches and we can use them in all ways. So they took those browse bones and they put them on top of the leaves, and the munching's the best part. So this is a lot more challenging than eating off a lunch tray. There's some social opportunity here as well. They're navigating some social cues. They're having to work through that browse, and it looks a little better than a green lunch tray, right? So again, an easily available resource that created an opportunity for this tortoise to kind of have a more enriching opportunity. Oops, play the video yet. So this is an example, again, from the zoo. This is I don't know what kind of hornbill it is, but it is a hornbill. And the keepers or the care staff had put this tree in the habitat kind of as enrichment, right? They thought, oh, it'll spruce up the space. But the hornbill didn't really use it, and it just collected dust. So the care specialist decided to hose it down, get the dust off, and then this is the behavior that happened right after hosing it down. Anyone know what behavior this is? What she's doing? Not drink, she might be, but this is bathing. So this is how hornbills generally would bathe in the wild, is they would use like natural brush. Sometimes when it rains at the safari park, you'll see the hornbills like rolling in the grass, which is fantastic. So the care specialist didn't mean to elicit this behavior, but by providing that resource of the wet leaves, we got this behavior. So again, thinking about how would a hornbill bathe in the wild rather than just giving it a tub, right, gives it the opportunity to elicit that natural behavior. Another example, this is from the safari park. This is Newman, our sand cat. He's a local celebrity. But the team wanted to elicit digging behavior for him. So Newman was really prone to pacing. He'll pace at the window a lot. He's also a nocturnal cat, so caring for a nocturnal species in a diurnal way can be challenging. But so the team wanted to challenge him a little bit. Rather than just presenting his mice in a bowl, they wanted to give him the opportunity to dig. So they decided to provide a cue so that Newman knew when he was being asked to dig, because he didn't know what the smell of mice meant. Historically, he'd been given that mice in a bowl. He didn't need to know what it smelled like. He knew if he saw a silver bowl, he got food. So the care specialist actually trained him to know that when he smelled cinnamon was the scent they decided to use, that he was being asked to dig and that he had a food resource somewhere in his habitat that he had to find and dig for. So this is the behavior. I'm going to play both videos at once. And so the team, they dug the mouse, they put it in a PVC pipe with wool actually on both sides, and then they dug that underground. So not only did he have to do this where he's like reaching in and grabbing it, but he also had to like get into the PVC pipe, pull the wool out, and then get the mouse. And they've actually found that pacing has gone down since they've started doing opportunities like this for him. And again, if we're thinking about his enrichment in a traditional or historic way, this isn't really enrichment, right? This is how the care specialists feed him, but it's feeding him in a way that's really enriching and challenging. This was a recent example from our bird working group at the park. So we have lots of vultures and condors, and we try to give them large prey items as much as we can, but sometimes that's a resource that's hard to come by just based on funding and availability. So one of our care specialists was thinking, she said, well, how can I make the ground meat, the Nebraska that we get every day, how can I make that like a carcass, right? That experience of eating it like a carcass. And she happened to have this like deadfall, like root ball that she found, and she smeared the meat all over it. So she got it way up in like all the crevices. I know it's gross. I think there's a video. Yeah, so here's the video. And the vultures worked on it for like 24 hours. And they actually were able to like kind of whittle the root ball down into like a small little clump. And you can see that this vulture is eating it the way that they might pick at a carcass, right? They're not gobbling that meat up like they would if it were presented in a bowl. He's having to pick at it, use his beak. I think there's another video here where he's standing on it, right? That's a natural behavior. You'd see them standing on carcass in the wild. So again, not necessarily something special or extra, just the way that they're presenting that food. This is a video. This is from a reptile group at the zoo. This one's one of my favorites. So this is our dwarf crocodile. And in the past, they'd been given a rabbit for food, and it would just be tossed in the water. And so again, the dwarf crocodile gets to eat that food pretty quickly. So the team were brainstorming. They said, well, what if we hook that rabbit up to like a large log so they have to rip it off? So this is an example that not everything works as we hoped, right? So maybe a little bit more challenging, but not significantly more. So they decided to try it with a bunch of shank meat instead. So they had a ton of shank meat and they hooked that to the log. And this was a lot more challenging to pull off. Yeah, so the care specialist had never seen that rolling behavior from them, and that's a very natural behavior for this species. So again, this didn't cost them any money. It didn't mean anything extra. It's just how they presented the food in a way that gave them that behavior. And you can see there's some interspecies interactions happening. There's actually there's actually a snapping turtle that's in this habitat as well that I don't have it on video, but he was going up and trying to get at it too. So that's kind of the idea of the enhanced care. The next step is to think about how can we take that one step further and give animals opportunity to build relationships more with their environment and understand cues. So if you think about it too, animals, especially in a zoo facility, everything that they need comes from us, right? And it's fine if we can build that relationship, but realistically, we want our animals to be doing animal things and having a relationship with their environment where we are obsolete, right? And so the idea behind the enriched events is to think about how can we give them opportunities to really engage with their environment and have more understanding and control over their day-to-day rather than just looking to us for everything. So this is a serval for those of you that don't know. Oh, you saw the video earlier, so never mind. So the team wanted to do an opportunity for serval because oftentimes in our animal programs, we'll talk about all the amazing skills of servals and how they can jump 6 feet in the air and swipe a bird out of mid-flight. But do you think they ever actually had the opportunity to exhibit that behavior? No, right? So the team was like, okay, how can we actually give them the opportunity to hunt a bird? Big challenge. We don't feed birds at our facility because of biosecurity reasons. Birds are really prone to disease, as you may know, with HPAI, right? So we don't feed birds. So the team felt really roadblocked by that. But they thought, well, how can we still create the experience of hunting for a bird with maybe a different meat item? So they developed this multi-day experience where they decided to mimic rain. So on the first day of the experience, they wet the whole habitat down with misters and hoses and made it really wet in there. In the wild, what do you think would happen after a lot of rain? What might come out next? Insects, yep. So the next day, they had crickets. They put live crickets in the habitat. And then what might come out after the live insects? Birds, yep. So again, we don't feed birds, but they had access to a shank, and opportunistically, the penguins at the zoo happened to be molting at the same time. So they stuck all the molten feathers all over that shank, and then this is what it looked like, okay? She was really mad about it. But it mimics that processing behavior of having to pull the leaves off of a bird without having that item. So in all of these experiences, we really challenge the teams to think outside the box and not feel limited by what resources we may or may not have at our disposal. And then the picture on the left is actually, that's a nest. So it was put up in a nest that she had to get access to. The next example is, this is from our sun bears at the zoo, or sloth bears, these are sloth bears. And they were getting access to a new habitat. And so again, as part of these programs, we're trying to think of what are the things that we do to the animals without giving them any context? How can we add context to that, right? So when we move an animal from one habitat to another, can we create cues leading up to that that might make sense for why an animal would leave its habitat, right? Can we deplete resources? Can we put smells of other animals in there? Just so they have a little more context. So this was, again, they were getting access to a new habitat. So rather than just opening the door and letting the bears go in, they wanted to kind of make it a little bit more enticing. So they creeped the door, so they only opened it about halfway. And then they blocked it with like a ton of palm fronds. They put cardboard boxes in there. They put a ton of dirt. as if the bears had to work to get access to the new space rather than just having a new habitat. This is some images of all the dirt and stuff that was stuffed in there. And then this is the fun video. And the sound's the best part. So this is the male. He's coming out first. The female's kind of waiting for him to test the waters before she decides to come out. Investigating the new space. And there wasn't anything necessarily novel about that new space. It's just kind of their inherent curiosity that allowed them to want to work to get access to the new bedroom. This is kind of one of our prime examples. So this comes from our tiger team at the zoo. So all of our working groups have kind of fun names. This was the Tiger Advancement Posse, or the TAP group. So they wanted to give tigers the opportunity to hunt for tapir, which is a prey species they would naturally encounter in the wild. The problem is the care specialists also care for the tapir that are right next door to the tigers at the zoo. So the care specialist, how do we make this an experience that's enriching if they already smell tapir all the time? So the care specialist said, well, let's make that scent or that smell actually mean something. So they created, again, a multi-day environment or multi-day event with multiple cues. So on the first day, they put these tapir foot molds throughout the space. So the tapir actually had a medical procedure done recently. So they had these foot molds opportunistically. So they made these little footprints. They also sprayed tapir urine throughout the habitat. On the second day, they broke some branches as if an animal were moving through the space. And then they sprayed more urine. On the third day, they had a kite that they actually flew across the space as if there was scavengers in the area kind of looking for prey. And then on the fourth day, they took an actual carcass, so we use lamb carcass, and they put this tapir funk grease buildup, which is really great, all over the carcass. And then they presented that carcass in the water. So all of those cues are specific to the tiger having to hunt for that tapir in the water. So then in the future, when they smell all of those scents, they notice that broken branches, they notice the footprints, they can put two and two together that, okay, I'm going to have to hunt for tapir in the water in the next couple days. And this is kind of a long video, but I'm trying to turn the sound off. So this is Chinta. He's one of the male tigers at the zoo, one of two brothers. And this is in the habitat, so in the water. And they don't often use the water. They will go in, but not too often. So he's having to do something he's maybe not super comfortable with. And the carcass is attached to that boomer ball, so it's kind of floating in the water. And you can see how hard he's thinking about it, right? At some point he actually fully submerges. Kind of rides it, drowning it. He eventually gets it. He does a kill bite there. That's on the wrong end, but that's okay. And then this is the best part. He's so tired, he actually has to sit down before he can start eating it, right? And so this was maybe like a 1 minute, 2 minute video, right? But that was still 1 or 2 minutes longer of him having to be challenged than if we had just put that carcass out for him to eat, right? And realistically, the cues don't necessarily need to make sense, right? I think the story of a tapir coming to the habitat, that's more for us, right? But it's just about giving him more opportunities to engage with his environment and know, okay, when I smell this thing and I see this thing, it means X, Y, Z, right? Rather than just a carcass appearing. Okay. This is a recent example from the safari park that I was pretty impressed by. So our elephant team is very behavior-based at the safari park. And we are right now going through construction. So our Elephant Valley project is happening. And what's interesting about that is the elephants are in the habitat while construction is happening. And so it means that their habitat is changing all the time. And sometimes they won't get access to one of their 2 yards. And that'll be closed for a couple weeks. And so the team decided, okay, rather than it just closing and all of a sudden they have less space, can we give them context for why that would happen? And they thought about what would happen in the wild that an elephant would maybe naturally want to move out of a space. And they thought a drought would probably make the most sense. So we are required by USDA to give animals access to water at all times, but how that water is presented is not. That's up to us. So the care specialist decided to make the water more challenging to get access to, and they filled these big jugs with water and they dug them under the ground. So in order to get access to water, the elephants had to dig for them. So this was in the weeks kind of leading up to the closure. They made this water challenging to get access to. And so this is the elephant. This is a sped up video. This is not how fast an elephant moves. She's working really hard to get to dig. And you'll see she gets down in there. I don't know if she ever uses her tusks at one point, but she's definitely working hard. So there she finally got access to the water. It was just kind of covered with a piece of cardboard, so she moved that out of the way and then got access to that water. And you'll see that she uses it in multiple ways. In fact, I'll skip to the next video. So this was a different spot. So they're having to reach in to get access, and then she actually kind of creates like a mud pile and starts mud bathing. And they interacted with this all through the night. So the care specialist saw video footage of them utilizing this water resource all night long. She rolls at one point. That's why I'm waiting to see the cuteness. And there's some good social opportunities here. I don't know if it's this video, but at some point an older female comes up and displaces her. So, so then in the I don't know that I need to play this last video, but in the after that drought experience, they closed off that other habitat, and then they provided lush opportunities in the new space. So then the question that we often get with these experiences is, does it work, right? Are we actually seeing the behaviors and the opportunities for these animals that we would expect to, that we would like to see? So this program really stemmed from a program at the zoo that was started in like 2018, with our large cats at the zoo. So the team had seen a lot of pacing with those cats, and they wanted to erase that behavior. They wanted to get rid of it. But then as they started to meet, they decided, well, we don't want to get rid of that behavior. We want to replace it with more positive behavior. So they called the program Replace the Pace, and that team still meets continuously every couple weeks to talk about opportunities. But when they first started, they collected behavioral data of the Asian leopards at the zoo. And they were looking at pacing behavior and also behavioral diversity. So behavioral diversity is the variation in behaviors that you see in an animal's behavioral repertoire. And what they found was, in the time before and after incorporating those enriched experiences, we saw a decrease in pacing from the cats, and we saw an increase in behavioral diversity. So that pacing behavior went down, but they were exhibiting more other positive behaviors as a result. So we did see that program was successful. And again, this is our longest running program, so it's the one that we see a lot more work come from. And we've seen a couple sets of cubs go through the program, and the care specialists are very hands-off with how these cubs are reared. They allow the mom to really do a lot of the work and the rearing. But they still give lots of opportunities for them. As you can see, it's really important for young animals to get these opportunities to learn how to be successful as adults. So we've seen that these cubs that go through this program are much more resilient to change. They're much more adaptable. They're able to overcome challenges. So we're seeing that this program is working. And then just a couple more slides. I want to touch on how this relates to conservation. So like I said earlier with the tiger video, that cue, the story of the tapir, the cue doesn't make sense, right? For these guys, it does, right? So if we think about our program in Hawaii, so the alala is the Hawaiian crow that is, actually, I don't know if it's extinct in the wild because we recently did some releases, but they're endangered. And so that's a bird that in the breeding programs, it's fed its food, chopped fruit in a silver dish, right? So when we release those birds into the wild, they don't necessarily have the context for understanding how to acquire fruit, how to look for seasonal changes in, weather patterns and things that might tell them what resources are available, right? All the things that they would need to know to be a successful bird in the wild, they don't have that experience if we're just feeding them in a silver bowl. So these experiences really have a great impact on our conservation and our re-release programs. So again, with the example of the Hawaiian crow, if we were to think of what makes sense for them in the wild, the care specialists started creating events for them where on the first day they might put a new plant or a new tree in their habitat. They might add sprinklers or rain, and then in the coming days, fruit appears in that tree. And then after that, insects come and pollinate those flowers, and then we see fruit coming. So they start to learn what is supposed to happen from one day to the next in their native habitat. The Hawaii program also cares for akikiki, which is a forest bird. And so one of the things that they've incorporated is looking at the rain schedule that would happen in the forest where the birds are from, and mimicking the mister schedule based on the time of year and what kind of level of rain. So a very simple change, but it gives that bird an opportunity to start understanding the idea behind seasonal changes that they might need to know in the future. So when I'm talking about enhanced care, enriched events, outcome-based care, really the verbiage doesn't necessarily matter. It's just trying to think about how can we create an experience for all of our animals that matches their native skills and abilities, their sensory opportunities and sensory modalities, so that they have an opportunity to exhibit enriching opportunities and enriching behaviors every single day. So that is all I have. Do you guys have any questions?
A couple actually. I don't know if that's too loud, but for example, you mentioned the Galapagos tortoises. So it has been a little bit since I've been to San Diego Zoo. I don't remember if you guys have Aldabras as well, or if it's Aldabra tortoises, or if it's fair. Oh.
I am less familiar with the zoo species that we have at downtown because I work at the safari park. But I don't know for sure. Yeah. We have a ton of reptiles at the zoo though, so I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Fair. The reason I brought them up was because, at least from what I've seen, I mean, I know Aldabras, maybe Galapagos, I'm not sure, but they'll essentially after a rain, and especially because of the rocky terrain that they tend to live in, they'll essentially drink through their nose, if that makes sense. Like they'll put their heads into like these crevices and kind of drink from like little puddles like that. I was wondering if anything like that has been tried with them or anything like that.
I don't know if we've done anything like that. It's hard because we have so many teams that are caring for so many animals. So the scale that this is happening is so slow. Like I've been at the safari park for 4 going on 5 years, and we're like still like slowly getting to the point where we're starting to build these experiences. But what teams do is they use that workflow tool that I showed earlier, and they'll meet and they'll talk about one behavior, and they'll talk about one aspect of that behavior. So it might be drinking, but specifically drinking rainwater. And they'll spend a whole meeting talking about just what it's like to drink rainwater. And then the next meeting, they'll meet and talk about drinking and what it's like to drink still water or water from a lake, right? So the level at which we're trying to get to these experiences is very slow. But that's the kind of thing that we're thinking about, right? Is like, what are the natural skills that they have? And do they have the opportunity to drink through their nose? Do we give them less resources so that they're kind of challenged to exhibit that behavior? So yeah, it's a great question. Anybody else?
Question. For the elephants, how did they know to dig? Because it's, I know the other animals were like kind of hinted at doing because of the other things going on, but I guess that wasn't explained on the elephant, so I just was wondering about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, we've had similar events at the zoo where the elephants were expected to dig and they had to be trained. A couple of reasons. The safari park elephants are given digging opportunities a little bit more often. Also, a lot of the elephants at the safari park are from the wild. So they came to us from Swaziland, which is now not Swaziland, and I don't remember the name of the country, but just from Swaziland back in the early 2000s. So kind of similar to Dr. Eric's presentation, I won't get into it, but there was culling that was going to be done, so we took some of their elephants. So a lot of the elephants at the safari park were wild, so they might have had the context to know to dig, but in a lot of experiences, we do kind of have to train the animals, which is tricky because in some situations, like a care specialist will present like an enriched event, and then the animal doesn't do it or doesn't know what to do. And the care specialist is like, well, we tried, but realistically, if an animal's never had to consume a carcass, they might not know that it's food. We have a lot of animals at the safari park that will not eat a brown rabbit because the only rabbits they've ever been fed come from farms and they're white. So they turn their nose up at a brown rabbit. It's not that they're incapable of hunting a brown rabbit, they just don't know that it's food. So a lot of times we do kind of have to train our animals to do the natural behaviors before they start to figure it out themselves. So, any other questions? Yeah.
I have a question about the elephants as well, especially at Elephant Valley when they're doing the construction. Have you guys noticed that the sound of the construction is stressing them out, and how do you mitigate that?
That's a great question. We did get a welfare concern about that about a year ago. The tricky thing is we don't know what the level of noise is. And because elephants hear at infrasounds at levels that we don't hear, it's really hard to measure what level is actually affecting their hearing. What we do is we look at their behavior to tell us if they're exhibiting any stress behavior. Trying to like not get too deep into it. At the safari park and within our program, we do also recognize that a small amount of stress can also be positive for animals, that overcoming stress is a natural part of life. So a little bit of stress as part of that construction is okay, especially if the team is doing things like what they did to kind of add some context to it. The team, like I said, is very into behavior, so they track elephant behavior every day. So we have behavioral observations that the team does to look at different levels of like sleeping behavior, aggression, things that they might see change drastically if there was a high level of distress for the elephants. They'll also look at some health metrics like the temporal gland secretions and things like that. Right now, we're not seeing anything that would indicate high levels of stress, but it's something that we're monitoring. So yeah, great question.
Second, so
I just switch.
oh, that works too. Okay, that's very loud. For kind of follow up, both on the previous question that I asked, but also on Abby's question earlier about how you were mentioning a small amount of stress can actually be beneficial. Um, this is the only example that came to mind, but for example, in enriching activities, for example, if you have a Galapagos tortoise and you have some kind of terrain that they have to navigate, it's great exercise, but I would imagine you also have to worry about, like, for example, if they aren't able to navigate it and they either roll over or anything like that. How do you kind of mitigate providing those opportunities without or while kind of limiting the risk of injury? So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a really great question, and it's something that we just kind of have to take on a case by case basis. It's honestly something that we deal with at the safari park a lot. So because we have the very large multi-species habitats, we do have a lot of animals that come up lame just because of the terrain. We occasionally have situations where an animal might die from a gore wound because of the interspecies interactions. And we just kind of monitor at what level we're seeing those things. And we just have frank conversations with our managers and our vets to see what level of comfort we're okay with. Generally, our mindset is that the opportunity to be in a large space, exhibiting natural behaviors, and having a social opportunity like a herd outweighs the risk of those negative things happening. And that's kind of our mindset with these experiences as well. And again, it all comes down to having those open conversations. Whenever we have these meetings with our teams, their managers are there. If a nutritionist can make it, they'll come. If we're concerned about a vet situation, we might invite a vet to come to that meeting too. So we're always open about those things so that everyone can say, like, okay, what is the level of risk with this? What level of risk are we okay with or comfortable with taking? And one really important thing is, like, who's going to take the fall if this happens? And a lot of times that comes to management having to step up and be like, if something happens, I'm going to take the responsibility for it, so that the care specialists don't feel that pressure, because they already like care so deeply for these animals on a daily basis that if the manager can take that responsibility off of them, that's kind of their role. So I don't necessarily have a good answer to that question. It's just, it kind of comes down to each situation and what the team is kind of comfortable with taking. Yeah.
I would love to know what your day looks like in your role and how you got into it.
Okay. Yeah, great question. I'll start with how I got into it, because I kind of stumbled into it. I really wasn't super interested in like zoo animal welfare when I first started my career. I took a class in animal welfare at Davis, and I thought it was fascinating. But anytime I saw it presented at zoos, I thought of it as enrichment, and I thought enrichment was like cardboard boxes, and I was like, oh, that's boring. So which it can, cardboard boxes have their place, no, don't get me wrong. But so I actually wanted to be a veterinarian, and then I just kind of stumbled into animal research. I did a couple internships. I worked at the primate center at UC Davis, and then I studied free-ranging rhesus macaques off the coast of Puerto Rico. And in both those situations, it was really interesting because I loved primate behavior. But what I realized, and I think that research is incredibly important, but I just didn't feel like it was my fit because I wanted to study animals not as a model for humans, but as a model for animals. And I was interested in like how can we better the lives of animals rather than that of humans. So that's when I decided to get my master's and work at Oakland Zoo, and I looked at social opportunities. And then before I was in this role, I was in a similar position at the safari park with our Northern White Rhino initiative, which I won't go too into deep in the details, but essentially it's the idea of bringing Northern White Rhinos back from extinction by implanting a Northern White Rhino embryo into a Southern White Rhino female. But that included a ton of intensive management for the potential surrogate moms. So they wanted to have a welfare monitoring program as part of that initiative. So my role was to kind of develop that program. So that was kind of, I got my in with my role, and then I was rehired as the welfare manager. I think as I got into my career and realized that welfare was much more complex than just like toys and cardboard boxes, I realized that like it was definitely fit for my interests. And then my day-to-day really varies. A lot of it is like managing behind the scenes, things like the animal welfare assessments. A lot of it is like when people ask me if I work with animals, I say I work with the people who work with the animals. So I'm part of our wildlife care team, and I work closely with all of our wildlife care specialists, but I don't actually directly interact with any of the animals. I facilitate a lot of the meetings that the teams are having. I do the welfare course. So a lot of times my day is like, sounds pretty boring, but like answering emails, like behind the computer, doing like reports and analysis. It's going to meetings. But occasionally it's something cool, like I'll go out and do like an observation of an animal, or I'll meet with a team to talk about like an animal's welfare situation, and we might go view that animal. So it just kind of varies day to day. But it's a lot of like computer stuff and then working with the teams. So.
So after seeing a lot of the enrichment things that you guys have done, it seems like a lot of it's experimental, kind of being like, okay, we'll see what works. Have you guys found any success in kind of you or other facilities and standardizing enrichment protocols based off of species, or is it kind of just very case by case because all sorts of animals have different backgrounds, the enclosures are different, and
Yeah, it's a little bit more of the latter. I think a lot of times we'll have teams that hear about our program and then they ask for like, hey, can you share one of your workflows? And we usually say like, we'll give you an example. But we think that the value really in the program is in encouraging the care specialist to think from this perspective of being outcome-based or behavior-based. So I think at some point standardizing it is kind of the goal, but we also don't want to remove kind of the art that goes into animal care and the flexibility that happens. So like some teams have standardized it in the sense that they have like a whole program. So I didn't show it just for the sake of brevity, but they'll have like an enrichment calendar, but not in this traditional sense of like Tuesday is sensory and Wednesday is, foraging or whatever. It's more like, okay, on Tuesday it's supposed to rain. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're going to do a rain event. And then the following week is going to be dry. So we're going to do a drought. And so like they'll create calendars, and some teams have what they call a playbook, where they have like all these different experiences that they brainstormed, and they just have it in a binder that they can refer back to. So some teams have kind of standardized it within their own teams, but like I said, I kind of fear standardizing it on a too broad a level and removing that art from it. Yeah, great question.
thank you.
Right, are there any other questions? No? All right, thank you so much, Louisa.
Thank you.
All right, so Logan is going to come up and introduce our next speaker. Just a quick announcement though, don't forget about our raffle. We did provide you with one free raffle ticket in your goodie bag, and then we are also selling them. So Venmo Amy, one